The idea of virtue ethics originally appears in the work of Socrates and Plato, and they talk about how do we come to know goodness. So the ancient Greeks were concerned with working out how we know the nature of goodness, and Aristotle took this a step further, took the idea of virtue ethics a step further by focusing on identifying and articulating the highest good. So we desire the highest good for its own sake, not because of what it allows us to accomplish. So virtue ethics argues that there are certain principles, indeed virtues, that we should not compromise, even if the outcome may not necessarily be desirable. So there are higher goods which we as intelligent, rational beings should at all times adhere to. That is the ethical principle, adhering and respecting those higher goods. So in virtue ethics, the highest good, or kind of the peak state of virtue ethics, if you like, is that notion of living well. Now that's kind of an ambiguous term, of course. So how do we determine what living well means? So virtue ethicists, or people who adhere to the principles of virtue ethics, suggest that we need to answer two questions. The first question is, what would someone with a proper understanding of honourable behaviour do in a given situation? So, built into that question is a certain moral dimension, because when we talk about someone with a proper understanding of honourable behaviour, there is an implication that there is kind of a universal set of standards. So virtue ethics, if you like, are perhaps the closest to a moral code in terms of there being, kind of universal or universally agreed principles. The second question that virtue ethics addresses in working out how we live well is the process of developing or cultivating a character that predisposes us to virtuous behaviour. So we come to know what honourable behaviour is by living an honourable life. So it's almost like a dog chasing its tail. It's a bit of a chicken and egg argument in many ways. So do we act honourably because we've acted honourably in the past, or does our virtuous and honourable behaviour and the way we've lived lead us to act honourably and virtually in the future? So that's why it's the closest to the idea of a moral code. So virtue ethics suggests that there are certain principles that all of us should adhere to. So being a person of virtue, being an honourable person and living an honourable life is more important than doing the right or wrong thing. Now, if that sounds confusing and a little bit contradictory, I don't blame you, because I think it's fairly safe to assume that being honourable and acting honourable, or doing the right thing, so acting honourably and those actions having good positive outcomes are the same. Not always. Not always. So, to give you an example, you might believe that in order to be a virtuous person, you should never lie. And that's a fairly common sense, everyday kind of example. certainly when you were a child, your parents probably told you that you should never tell a lie. And that's kind of a common way of raising children. However, as we get older, we know that always telling the truth can sometimes hurt people's feelings. So here we have a little bit of an ethical dilemma. Do you adhere to the higher truth of never lying, or do you risk hurting someone's feelings? Perhaps someone's feelings that you love, the feelings of someone that you love, you may hurt the feelings of a friend, a family member. So here we have a problem. Do we adhere to that kind of concrete moral code, or do we begin to apply it in certain situations and not in others? So we're introducing the idea of weighing up the consequences of our actions.